Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Thursday edition of Shank's Children's Lit class. Hope you're having a good week. This has been a very important day in the life of Chelsea. Um, I took her to the vet this morning just to kind of get her acclimated to the vet. They have a free wellness check for new kittens at Stowe Kent Hospital, Animal Hospital. So I took her there and got her checked in and everything, and they loved her, of course. And then I promised her that when we came home, I would open up a little bit more of the house to her. She's been stuck in the living room for the past almost 3 weeks, and I have too, so I kind of feel liberated as well. So I opened up a couple more of the rooms, still not the entire house yet, but I have opened up a couple other rooms, including the kitchen and this my office here. So she may make an appearance at some point, but she's so busy running around, uh, checking out all the new places she can hide and make trouble. And every time I try to get close to her, she runs away from me too, because I think she thinks that, she's getting away with something, you know. Um, oh, she's in the room right now. Okay. I don't know if she can hop up here or not, but anyway, so very big day for her. So that's the latest in the Chelsea news for you Chelsea fans. All right, be a relatively short video today. I realize now that the last video was kind of long, but mostly because I wanted to go over the midterm exam answers. That took a little bit of time. And speaking of that, I have completed uh, grading the midterms, obviously, and they are in Canvas. And the grades were very, very good, which I kind of anticipated. Um, so well done for most, if not all of you. You did a nice job on this. We are now pretty much at the midterm time in the semester. And I can tell, oh, there she is. Might be hard to concentrate today. I can tell from a lot of the correspondence that I'm receiving from many of you by email that you're enjoying the class and are benefiting from it, and that's always good to hear. Obviously, again, I would rather teach this in a classroom situation where I could see you all personally and interact with you personally. But I think this is the kind of the next best thing. I hope it is. And it seems to me that things are working out pretty well so far. So we will continue on in the second half of the semester. Um, Things are moving pretty fast as they do, but I think most, if not all of you, have been able to keep up and do a really nice job. So keep that up. I appreciate that. All right, so it will be a relatively short video today. I do want to talk a little bit about Charlotte's Web as our first example of fantasy, and I'm going to go over some of the potential answers to the worksheet questions that I gave you for homework for today. And that's pretty much going to be the main thing. I do want to explain the homework that's coming up before midnight on Sunday, and it's a pretty big assignment. In fact, uh, in a regular class situation in a semester, these would actually be two separate assignments, and I'd probably assign one for a Tuesday and one for the Thursday. But again, since we're in the summer and everything's sort of accelerated, we're going to combine two assignments into one bigger one, and I want to explain that today. And I guess that's it. So we might as well let's get on with it. Let me give you a number first. 18 is our first number. So jot that down. All right, let's explain the homework. And speaking of Chelsea, um, there's Chelsea being cute there. I caught her like mid yawn. She doesn't usually go around looking like that, but I just happened to catch that and I thought it was kind of cute. All right, so obviously this assignment is due by midnight on Sunday. As always, please watch this lecture from, we're now Thursday, July 17th. Boy, summer is really flying by, isn't it? We just have about a month to go before fall semester. Oh my God. Anyway, take it a day at a time, Shank. Take it a day at a time. Um, so obviously watch the lecture, take note of the numbers in the sequence. I just gave you the first one. All right, and then I am going to ask you to read all of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which will be our second example of fantasy. This would be an example of high fantasy. And then, as I mentioned, there's actually going to be two assignments that I'm going to combine into one 50-point assignment. So even though they are on separate files in Canvas, do them together and then email them to me together. Don't send two separate emails. And I'll go over this in a minute. I'll show you what you're supposed to do. All right, so there will be a 50-point take-home quiz. One assignment deals with wardrobe in particular, and then the other is called the fantasy assignment. It's going to give you an opportunity to discuss and go over and talk about another example of fantasy of your own choosing that you would like to do a little bit of writing about. All right, now, a very important comment here. It says the presentations in the fantasy group are due, and that would be the 4 students in that particular group. But looking at how big the take-home quiz is, if you would like, for those 4 students in that fantasy group of presenters, if you'd like a few extra days for that, I would allow you to turn that into me by next Thursday. Wednesday by midnight. Okay. So if you are in the fantasy group of presenters and you want to have a few extra days, feel free to do that. Or go ahead and turn it in on Sunday night like you were planning to do anyway. The syllabus says they're due Sunday by midnight, but I'll give you a few extra days if you're in that group. Okay, so very important comment there. And then if you want to start looking ahead a little bit, don't forget everybody has to do an author profile, which I explain like I think the very first day or two of class. Those will be due by next Wednesday by midnight. And then our next book we're going to do will be The Bridge to Terabithia. That'll also have to be read by next Thursday. That's our first example of realistic fiction. Okay, so as we move on to that genre, we'll take a look at a classic, Bridge to Terabithia. Okay, so those are the assignments for midnight Sunday. And again, if you're in the fantasy group of presenters, if you need a few extra days, you can turn that into me later next week. I didn't want to lay too much on those 4 students. Okay. And obviously, if you have any questions about the assignments or what I'm looking for, you can email me. But let me go over quickly the assignments I'm going to ask you to do. First of all, these are the wardrobe quiz questions that I'd like you to answer for a total of 20 points. And is that right? Yeah. One's worth 20 and one's worth 30. But anyway, there are a series of questions here dealing with Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And in my discussion, and again, if we were having a regular class, we'd have a discussion about this. Maybe in my video lecture next time, we'll take on some of these other questions that aren't highlighted. But the ones I want you to actually write out brief answers to are the ones that are highlighted. And I think maybe, well, they're all important and they're kind of comprehension questions just to make sure you read it. But maybe the most important question is number 17. I talked the other day about how creators of fantasy can make their fantasy believable and realistic. And we went over the different techniques and the different things we see in fantasy that help do this. I think Lewis uses any number of those techniques. So as you're reading, you might be on the lookout for those. And then that's what question 17 is all about. Also, you've read a little bit of information, background information about Wardrobe and Lewis, and whether or not the story is a Christian allegory or not. And we'll talk much more about that concept in my next video lecture. But if you read the article, and you should have, uh, he was a little bit cagey in answering that question. Is Aslan a Christ-like figure? And he kind of left it a little bit open-ended. He called it not so much an allegory, but a supposal, which is kind of interesting. So that's what 15 deals with. What elements of the story seem to imply that this is somewhat of an allegory or a metaphor for the Christ story? Okay, is it a Christian allegory? And I think there are some little clues dropped here and there that would help show that. And then we'll talk about the implications of that. And again, a number of you are education majors, and this is a kind of topic that would come up, if you're teaching Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And I seem to remember being taught this or reading this book when I was in grade school. But I don't remember whether or not the Christian allegory part of it was ever brought up. And of course, one question should be, should it be, in these very sensitive times? So anyway, these are all things we'll talk about in regards to Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe after you've read it. So answer 1, 3, 4, 8, 11, 13, and 17. All right, so answer those. And then I'll explain the fantasy assignment. I sort of brainstormed recently all the different titles that would be geared for children or maybe young adults, but mostly children, that I would consider in the realm of fantasy in one way or another. And so here is the list. Oh my God, did I put that? No, I did not put Shrek down. Somebody must have hacked my canvas and put that in there. Anyway, and it's not even the most updated. I mean, you're always going to be updating these because there's great titles that come out all the time. But just as an example, or examples, both classic and more recent, a lot of these are books, a lot of these are movies, a lot of them are books that were made into movies. But I think any of these could be considered fantasy, or maybe even some a little bit science fiction, which is, again, very much related to fantasy, as we talked about the other day. So here's the assignment. It says choose a title from this list, or, like I said, I'm always trying to update this. If you have a favorite fantasy book or movie or TV show for kids that's not on this list and you'd like to do the assignment for your choice, absolutely feel free to do it. All right. So you don't have to choose a title from this list. You can pick your own. And then do a brief analysis of the work as fantasy. So first of all, is it more of a high fantasy, or is it more of an example of light fantasy based on how we define that? All right, then I'd like you in a few sentences to provide a brief plot summary of the story, just in case we're not familiar with what it's about. Describe the time and place, particularly in the story. Is it set in a particular time and place? If it is, make sure you mention that. In a few sentences, describe the main character in the story. All right, so who is the focus on? Okay. Then are there, and I'm willing to bet there are there themes to the story? Are there lessons, messages, morals to the story that children can learn from watching this movie or reading this book? Okay. So what are some lessons, morals to the story? We do this for every book, as you know by now. What do you think would be the best age and grade for this particular work? And again, whether it's a movie, it could be a book, it could be a TV show, something geared for children though. And what would be the best age and grade? So don't say, well, children of all ages would love this, but try to pinpoint it. Say, I think this would be great for fourth graders or people, kids who are 10 years old. And then in a sentence or two, explain your rationale for that. All right. Are there any potential issues uh, that might lead it to be banned or challenged? Uh, in other words, are there any potential censorship issues, and what might they be? And if you're dealing with a pretty innocent work for really young kids, you could just say, I don't really see any potential issue with this book. I don't know why anybody would possibly want to ban or challenge it. But I think in many of the cases, uh, you know, the answer to that probably is yes. There might be some issues, and what might they be? Okay, based on all the different reasons we've talked about why books are banned or challenged. And then also, maybe most importantly, how does the creator of the work you've chosen, how do they use the techniques that we've talked about to help make their story believable and realistic, so to speak? Okay. So that was a big part of my lecture the other day. We're going to talk a little bit about how we see these techniques in Charlotte's Web today. You're going to be asked to show how these techniques are used in wardrobe, and then do it for your chosen work of fantasy as well. And then finally, just to get back to our general list of criteria in what makes a good work of children's literature, how does it meet some of the other, criteria, the benefits and goals? How does it meet the different goals of children's literature? And again, this is kind of our basic um, list of criteria that we've been working with from the very beginning. So what are qualities of good children's literature that it has other than being a good work of fantasy? All right. So answer briefly those different points in the analysis. So classify it, summarize it, describe the setting, describe the character, tell me about some lessons, messages, morals to the story, excuse me. What would be the best age appropriateness for the book or movie? Do you see any potential issues? How does the author or creator use some of the techniques we've talked about to make their fantasy more believable so we can suspend disbelief for a while? And then what are some other basic uh, criteria or qualities that it has that make it a great work of children's literature? All right, so that's the second part of the assignment. And again, my numbers were wrong. Actually, I'll change this. The Charlotte's Web worksheet questions, I'm making 30 points, and then the fantasy analysis will be 20 points. So that's where the 50 came from. So I just noticed now my my copy didn't show that. Okay, let me give you another number, 27. 27. All right, I want to talk a little bit about Charlotte's Web as an example of light fantasy, a classic example of light fantasy. But before I do, there's Chelsea. So she's starting to get comfortable in my office. So anyway, um, Charlie's favorite spot was right here by the window, but I don't think she can jump up that high, at least not yet. So that's something she's going to have to work up to. All right, let's talk a little bit about Charlotte's Web and go over the answers to the web sheet, worksheet. I guess it was a web sheet for the Charlotte's Web questions. And I'm in the process of uh, reading through some of the ones that came in early. Uh, I mentioned the other day, what I love about this book uh, is that it works on so many different levels. I mean, it works as an example of light fantasy, obviously, but it does a lot of other things. And I think that's probably why it has remained so popular over the years. And I hear that it's still taught and read in schools today, and it makes me feel good. So it does any number of things. And so I just thought that I would kind of review the different strengths of the book as are indicated by these questions. First of all, we talk about how good children's literature will broaden a child's vocabulary. And certainly this is true. Uh, and White did this on purpose, I think. The book, among other things, is very educational and teaches us new words. And I just made a kind of a running list. I don't know how many of these you picked up on, and you didn't have to do all of them, but I'll just kind of run through them. Salutations, of course, is a very prominent word in the story. Humble, again, very prominent, one of the words that helped describe Wilbur. Radiant, again, might be a word that they wouldn't know depending on the age and grade. But other words like versatile, gullible, injustice, campaign, complimentary, languishing is a very important word. This is the word she uses when she kind of breaks the news to Wilbur that she is dying. Uh, Oblige, sedentary, provender, gnawing, compunction, idiosyncrasy, veritable, scruples, oblige. I think I said that twice. I did. Anesthetic, loathed, inheritance, untenable, forlorn, jubilee, hullabaloo. Always like that word, hullabaloo. And of course, another word that's very important that we learn about is, her egg sac is her magnum opus. So we learn what that is all about. All right. So any number of words that probably, depending on when the child is first introduced to this book, a lot of these words they might not know. Maybe they've heard of them, but don't know the definition. And this book, provides definitions for all these different terms. And I think I mentioned the other day, I can picture, I don't know, a second grade teacher, third grade teacher, whatever age and grade you pick, uh, maybe making a part of the study of the book, maybe a vocab list where they have to look up the words and then give them a quiz because teachers have to be mean and give quizzes every once in a while. So no shortage of words that are introduced that broaden the child's vocabulary. I think that's one strength. Tying in with that, a lot of information about particularly farm life that we learn about, or animal life that we learn about in the course of this story. Especially interesting if you are, as I mentioned before, a city kid like me, um, who's never who um, never had to do chores, never had to slop pigs or, milk cows or whatever. I don't know how many of you have ever had that kind of experience or whatever, live out in the country. So all that kind of stuff is foreign to me, and I would imagine is new to a lot of kids. So not only does it tell an entertaining story, a very moving story, and sometimes very poignant story, um, we learn about stuff. And I jotted down a few things here. A lot of them have to do with animal life, and a lot of them have to do with the life of a spider. Um, and again, spiders get a bad rap, and a lot of people, have arachnophobia and are frightened by spiders. I think I told you my story about the student had arachnophobia. I won't repeat that story again. But we learn about a spider, and they provide a very valuable function. So I think one of the benefits of this story is, White sort of um, redoes the spider's reputation a little bit. You'll never look at a spider quite the same way again after you've read Charlotte's Web. I mean, you still may run from the room screaming after you see one, but at least you kind of know what they're good for. So we find out that the spider sacs are waterproof. That's kind of interesting. That helps keep the eggs warm. We find out the spider legs have 7 parts. Interesting. We find out that they spin different kinds of webs for different purposes. Yeah, I didn't know that as a kid. We find out how they kill their prey and why they kill their prey. Basically, they're vampires. They basically drink the blood. They don't actually eat their prey. They just suck the blood from them. Um, so we learn a lot about spiders, including how many eggs they have in her egg sac, which is kind of interesting. Other things we learn, it takes 30 days for a goose to lay an egg. We find out that pigs can burrow under the dirt or mud to warm or cool themselves. Um, so you wonder why pigs spend so much time in the mud. Uh, some kind of, sad realities of life on the farm. We find out that the runts are killed right away, and Wilbur was a runt and was about to be killed, but the little girl Fern uh, saves his life. Another kind of blunt reality of life on the farm is that the pigs who come up in the spring are usually killed at Christmas time. Um, so let's face it, most of the animals on the farm, serve some kind of purpose, and the pig's purpose is mostly for food eventually. But, Wilbur, through the course of the story, is able to avoid that fate uh, due to the actions of a number of different people, including Fern and then, of course, Charlotte. Charlotte's activities make this pig, who is not really all that special, seem special enough that they spare him from the fate that other pigs have to go through. So we learned some stuff about life on the farm, some kind of interesting, some kind of sad. But again, I think the story doesn't sugarcoat the idea that, all of this is kind of the cycle of life, and you're born and you live for a while, and then you die. Um, Outstanding use of sensory details besides just sight. I think White, if you noticed, uh, spends a lot of time describing the setting, which is a farm for the most part. Um, and then at some point, they go to the carnival, and a lot of things are described there. And again, not just sights. They go to the fair, describe the different smells, the different tastes of all the different kinds of fair food. I think we've all been to a county fair at least once, haven't we? Uh, you walk in and you smell. I just remember you walk in and you smell a combination of cotton candy and manure. Do you know what I mean? Um, and so he takes great pains to describe some of these smells: the smell of hay, the smell of manure. There's a scene describing a rotten egg, and I think we all kind of can relate to how that smells. Other things are described like sounds, different birds singing and the sounds they make, the sounds of the stream in the spring. He takes some time to describe that. When Wilbur is eating a slop, he describes that in some detail. The sheep, uh, the sounds they make in the pens, the sparrows calling out Peabody, Peabody. Um, and even other things like, Lurvy's tobacco smoke from his pipe. Uh, so very, very vivid descriptions here. And again, we're in a fantasy world, but it's grounded in reality. And the use of the senses help put us in a very grounded, real setting. It doesn't get much more basic and real and grounded than a Midwestern farm and all the different sounds and smells and tastes that are involved in that setting. So excellent use of sensory details. Um, Symbolism in this story. And I certainly think that Wilbur, even though he's a pig, is the child representative in the story. He's the character that children will relate to. And he shows a lot of childlike or childish characteristics. And he's treated like a child too by the other characters, starting with Fern, and then of course Charlotte treats him as if he were her child. Um, Other things that make him childlike, I kind of jot these down. He's afraid of spiders, at least initially, like probably a lot of kids are, or a lot of adults are too, for that matter. Um, he's constantly looking for a friend. He's lonely. He doesn't feel like he fits in. He doesn't have a lot of friends to reach out to. And, children obviously want to have friendship in their life, and Charlotte befriends him. He's the one who learns these new words, right? So, as the child reading the book learns new words, so does Wilbur. Or I guess I should switch it around. As Wilbur learns these new words, so does the child reading the book. I guess that would be the better way to put it. Um, he's very curious about things. He always wants to know what's going on. He thinks he can do everything, uh, but he realizes he can't. Um, Loves to play. Uh, is a bit needy. Um, is a bit emotional at times. Uh, is prone to temper tantrums or crying. Does get a bit upset when Charlotte explains how she uh, does away with her prey. All of these, though, I think are very, very much childlike reactions to the world around him. And as such, a child reading the story can relate to that. I don't think he's the only symbol in the story, though. I think we see other symbols in the story, characters who represent other things than just what they would represent, objects, whatever. Templeton is a great character. The rat, and I've talked about arachnophobia, fear of spiders. I have a thing about rats. I don't know if you agree with me. I always say that if I ever found a rat in my house, I'd sell the house. I mean, I just couldn't deal with it. And thankfully, we don't have a rodent problem. Never have, knock on wood. Charlie, I think, probably could have handled a rodent. I don't know about I don't know about Sleeping Beauty over there. I don't know that she, at least not yet. I don't know that she'd be much good at. I think she can maybe handle a mouse. But anyway, Templeton. Back to my point. Um, he represents a lot of negative qualities that people have, including greed and selfishness, and he's a real glutton. Um, but if you notice, uh, he redeems himself at the end. He helps in Charlotte's plan to save her egg sac. Of course, it took a little bit of bribery on Wilbur's part, but he still did it. I mean, he ended up doing the right thing. So there's a little message there, it seems to me. The story itself, I think I mentioned this before, is about the circle of life, and it's something that Charlotte even talks about. Um, Fern, I think, is maybe symbolic, and she is literally, well, not a child, but you know, uh, maybe somebody reading the book would be closer to Fern's age and could relate to Fern. I always thought it was kind of funny, but probably realistic too, that when she's younger, she's been bestowed this gift of being able to uh, hear the different animals talking. And wow, what an incredible, magical, fantastical power to have. But boy, did you notice once she discovers boys, boy, she's out of she's out of there. Henry Fussy. How do you keep them out on the farm when they've seen Henry Fussy? But anyway, um, and I think that's kind of realistic. And she outgrew the animals on the farm. She didn't spend that much time with them anymore. Um, as she got older and she had other interests. And so there you go. And I think, there's a sly lesson about life there. Actually, I don't know if you noticed this too. I guess we'll talk about this in a little bit. But the adults, and I guess that could include an older Fern, the adult human beings in the story don't come across very well. I think White kind of points out how vain they are, how in some cases stupid they are, um, maybe a little bit how selfish they are, and it's the animals that come across better. You know, obviously Charlotte is the most sympathetic character, and also I think we come to love and appreciate Wilbur, even though he can be very childish. But the human beings, you know, the family itself, you know, not too bright. They see this message in the web and they think, you know, Wilbur had something to do with it. Well, you know, duh, the spider did it. It never occurs to them that the spider is special. But anyway, um, and of course they take all the credit. They didn't do anything, but hey, it's our pig. Look at our pig, what he did. And so, like a lot of human beings, they take credit for what their animals do. And I guess I'm doing that too. Well, yeah, she's on out there. Okay, I guess she's found a new place to, her new favorite place to lay down. All right, so a lot of symbolism in the story. I would even say that if you notice this, uh, all the different animals in the on the farm um, kind of represent a neighborhood with a lot of different kinds of people, and they all have different interests, but they all live together and they try to get along, but they speak differently and maybe have different attitudes about things. Maybe a microcosm of our society, both for good and evil, I guess. Um, and he's very careful to make each character, each animal, kind of have a distinctive kind of personality and a distinctive way of speaking, if you notice that. Um, Obviously, uh, what happens with Wilbur as he grows older, he becomes uh, more able to accept responsibility, and Charlotte trusts him with the ultimate responsibility, taking care of her egg sac, and he is up to the challenge. So, I mean, you could say he represents, you know, growth and maturity and taking on responsibility. Um, Certainly, this kind of ties in with this. Um, a lot of lessons, symbolically or not, that are imparted in the story. And again, I think this is one of the things that really makes the story strong, including the idea, you know, that death is a part of life and it is something we have to acknowledge and deal with. Uh, I don't know how old you were. Oh, I better give another number. 33. 33 is our next number. Again, I got entranced by the sound of my own voice and I forgot the numbers. Um, but a lot of very powerful messages and lessons about death being a part of life. Oh, I know what I was going to say. I don't know how many of you lost somebody uh, special to you when you were a child. And of course, the older you get, the more you can kind of understand the concept of death and et cetera, et cetera. But you know, when you're a child, it's very difficult. I mean, if a grandparent dies, it might be hard to process. But you know, one of the obvious themes in the story is that it is a part of life and it's something we all have to deal with. Um, Also, the importance of friendship. Uh, you know, one of the most moving passages, if I can find it real quick. This is toward the end. Um, and Wilbur asks, why did you do all this for me? I don't deserve it. I've never done anything for you. And she says, you have been my friend, replied Charlotte. That in itself is a tremendous thing. I wove my webs for you because I liked you. After all, what's life anyway? We're born, we live a little while, we die. A spider's life can't help being something of a mess with all this trapping and eating flies. By helping you, perhaps I was trying to lift up my life a trifle. Heaven knows anyone's life can stand a little of that. And so, so important to have a friend and to be a friend to somebody else. And so I think that's an important lesson in the story. Others that I jotted down, don't judge by appearances. Again, everybody's afraid of the spider, but it turns out she's the most sympathetic, wisest character in the whole story. Humans don't always know everything. And this is maybe somewhat of a subtle message, a little bit controversial. I mean, adults don't always know everything. Might be a dangerous message to throw at a kid, but I think we see that in the story. It's important to be humble. That's one of Wilbur's strongest traits. It's one of the words that's in the web that describes him. And it's meant to be a great compliment and a great attribute that we all should aspire to. Be humble in your achievements and with your achievements. You can be proud of your accomplishments, but not overly proud. Be humble. And I think that's a very important message in our 21st century when everybody, including kids, seem to be taught to brag and uh, to take credit whenever you can and step over the next guy so you can get in charge and you can be in the lead and you can get all the attention. We see way too much of that, and I think it's a nice message to remind kids to be humble. I think that's very important. Let me give you another number. Get caught up on the number 60, 60. Also, there's a couple of times when, as I mentioned with in the case of Templeton, it's important to when you have the opportunity to do the right thing. And again, then don't take credit for it or be humble about doing the right thing. Don't brag that you did the right thing. Stand up for what you believe in. I mean, Fern does that. Let's give her credit. I mean, she stood up for Wilbur and saved his life. He was a runt. He was going to get killed, but she stood up for him. Be selfless, not selfish, and don't take things for granted. So I think those are all very important themes that we see in the story. And hopefully you guys caught some of those as I did. All right. Age appropriateness. I'll leave that up to you. Like I said, I believe it was third grade when our teacher read, each afternoon she would read a chapter or two if we were good, and we got it and we understood it. I'd be curious to see what you had to say in answer to that question. A lot of it has to do with the fact that the vocabulary is a bit advanced. But again, White is very clever. When the big words are used, they're almost always defined as well. So the kid doesn't have to go rushing to Google to find out what the word means. So anyway, I would say personally, maybe 8, 9, 10 years old. Um, any older than that, it might be a little bit too childish or too simplistic. But I don't know. It's a warm story that I think I always enjoy rereading it every year. Um, it makes me feel good about life. And then finally, and again, you're going to look for these in wardrobe. You're going to look for these in the choice of fantasy that you use for your assignment for the weekend. What are some of the techniques that are used to help make the fantasy believable? And I've already kind of alluded to one. He grounds the story in a realistic setting first. So, and then these weird, fantastical things start to happen. The animals can talk to one another and communicate with one another. And the fantasy really doesn't, and Charlotte, I should say, and Charlotte's also able to actually spell and write things in her web. So those are the fantastical elements. It doesn't go much deeper than that. This is why we would call this a light fantasy. But there are, things that, we read and we say, well, animals can't talk to one another. And, spiders can't spell words in their web. But if you ground the story in a realistic setting, it helps us suspend disbelief. We do have a disbelieving character in the mother, and maybe she comes around a little bit. We certainly have an authority figure who helps validate the idea that maybe it is possible that, Fern can hear the animals talk. So he doesn't toss it out of hand. So we have a respected figure, Dr. Dorian. Um, whenever I hear the name Dr. Dorian, I always think of, does anybody remember the old sitcom Scrubs? Wasn't JD, wasn't his name Dorian? Anyway, so we have a respected doctor figure who, doesn't poo-poo the idea that this could actually happen. Um, and again, great sensory details to help us feel like we're there. We can hear it, we can smell it, we can taste it. And then I think the fantasy is consistent for the most part. I think the light fantasy world that White has created is pretty much consistent. But I guess this wasn't. I thought I had another question here. I personally thought there were a few inconsistencies, and I thought that was a question. It should have been. Anyway, uh, one thing, and I kind of have answers to each of my inconsistencies. But one thing is, if all the different animals, including insects, could talk and communicate with one another, always kind of wondered why the fly that Charlotte would kill and suck their blood from, the flies never had any lines, maybe because it probably be too disturbing. Like, do we really need a scene where the fly goes, "Oh, Charlotte, please don't," it might make kids go running and screaming from the book. So it's kind of curious that most of the animal life have the ability to speak, but conveniently, Charlotte's victims have nothing to say. So, and again, I don't know that kids would notice that, probably not, but I did because, that's why they pay me the big money, because I pick out stuff like that. Let me give you another number, 77. 77. A couple of other things that I thought were a little bit maybe too off the the world that he had created. Um, Charlotte is very, very wise, knows how to spell, um, and yet the one thing I kind of had a question about is she sends Templeton out to try to find in a paper or something some words that she can use. And I'm thinking, why would she even need to do that if she has this great vocabulary? However she achieves it, I have no idea. And then my answer, I thought about it. My answer to that is maybe, she really didn't need Templeton to do that, but wanted him to get involved and give him a chance to, help and do the right thing. And so she gave him a task to do that she really didn't need him to do, but he carries it out and he becomes a part of, the plan. And so that inconsistency can kind of be explained. Um, the other one is, how does she know all this stuff? How does she know about the Queensboro Bridge, for example? Um, I don't know. Some of the things didn't quite fit in with the fantasy world that he created, but that would be my nitpicking. Um, but again, we're talking about a work for children, probably 8, 9, 10 years old. So we don't have to put too fine a point on it. And again, it's an example of light fantasy. We might be a little bit more critical if it were posing as a work of high fantasy in which the themes were deeper and there was more going on than what there is. But I think, all in all, we can overlook some of the inconsistencies in the fantasy world that was created. Okay. Losing my voice here. So that's Charlotte's Web. I usually like to spend a little bit more time on The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe because as I said, it is more of an example of high fantasy. There's a lot more going on in that book, um, probably for an older reader than than Charlotte's Web's readership. So we'll talk a little bit more about fantasy by way of Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe next time around. And then also we will take a look at your examples of fantasy and particularly how your work of fantasy uses some of the different techniques to ground the story in a realistic way so that we suspend our disbelief. Okay. I guess that's all I got today. Yeah, she's sacked out. Can you tell the head from the tail? Yeah, you can. So, um, on behalf of Chelsea and myself, have a great rest of your week, and we will see you on Monday. Thank you.